The funeral flowers were already wilting when I found John's old phone. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by casserole dishes from neighbors whose names I barely remembered, staring at the device that had been tucked away in his desk drawer like a shameful secret. The screen was cracked across one corner. Typical John, never bothering to fix anything that still functioned. My hands trembled as I powered it on, not from grief this time, but from something darker. Something that had been gnawing at me through 37 years of marriage. The voicemail notification blinked red. One unplayed message. I'd suspected for years. The late-night grocery runs that took hours. The careful way he folded certain receipts and tucked them into his wallet. The tenderness in his voice when he thought I wasn't listening, speaking to someone on the phone about making sure they had enough. I'd convinced myself it was work. John managed a small construction company, always looking out for his crew. But work didn't explain the children's toys I'd found in his truck that time, or the way he'd grown distant whenever I mentioned traveling, as if he couldn't bear to leave town. The message was dated 3 days ago. 3 days before the heart attack that took him from me as he loaded groceries into his truck outside the Piggly Wiggly. I pressed play, my finger hovering over the speaker like it might burn me. "Mr. John?" The voice was small, tentative. A child's voice. "This is Emma. Mama's real sick again, and she won't go to the hospital. She keeps coughing up that red stuff and she's so hot. Tommy and Jake are scared. Can you come? Please? We don't know what to do." The message ended with the soft sound of crying, barely audible but devastating in its restraint. I stared at the phone, my carefully constructed world of suspicious anger crumbling around me. Emma. Not Claire as I'd imagined. Some sultry woman who'd stolen my husband's heart and bank account. Emma, who sounded no older than 8, calling the man I'd buried yesterday with the desperate trust of a child who believed he could fix anything. My coffee had gone cold. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was probably peering through her curtains, wondering why I hadn't drawn mine yet. The house felt enormous and suffocating all at once, filled with the echoes of John's presence and the weight of secrets I was only beginning to understand. I dialed the number. It rang twice before a woman answered, her voice raw and exhausted. "Hello? Is this Claire?" A pause. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Whitney Brown. I'm John's wife." The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She'd been expecting this call, dreading it perhaps, but expecting it nonetheless. "Mrs. Brown, I can explain—" "No," I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I need to understand. There's a little girl who left a message on John's phone. Emma. She said her mother was sick. That's my daughter." Claire's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I know this must be— Where are you?" "I'm at Mercy General. Emma called your husband because I collapsed yesterday." The children found me on the floor. She was crying now, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. "I'm so sorry about John. He was everything to us." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything to us. While I'd been nurturing resentment and suspicion, my husband had been someone's everything. Someone's lifeline. "I'll be right there," I heard myself say. "Mrs. Brown, you don't have to—" "What room?" 314. "But really, you don't need to come. We'll figure something out. John always said we should never be a burden to anyone, especially not to you. He talked about you all the time, said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known." I ended the call before she could say anything else, afraid that if I heard one more word about my husband's secret kindness, I might shatter completely. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of autumn trees and memories I was seeing with new eyes. John insisting we keep the old truck even when we could afford better. The way he'd grown quiet whenever I complained about money, never defensive, just sad. The gentle way he'd redirected conversations when I'd suggest we finally take that cruise, or redo the kitchen, or buy something nice for ourselves. I'd thought he was being cheap, controlling. I'd never considered that he might have been protecting someone else's survival. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation, a familiar scent that brought back memories of my own mother's final days. Room 314 was at the end of a long corridor, and I found myself walking slower with each step, uncertain of what I'd find or what I'd say. Through the small window in the door, I could see a woman propped up in bed, an oxygen mask covering most of her face. She looked fragile, like a bird that had been caught in a storm. Her dark hair was lank against the pillow, and her eyes were closed. But even in sleep, there was tension in her features, as if rest was something she'd forgotten how to do. In the chair beside her bed sat a little girl with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. Emma. She was holding a small stuffed rabbit, its fur worn smooth from handling, and she was whispering something to it, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a story. I knocked softly and entered. Emma looked up with eyes that were far too old for her face, brown and serious and filled with the kind of wariness that comes from too much disappointment. When she saw me, she clutched the rabbit tighter. "Are you Mrs. Brown?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." I moved closer, noting how she positioned herself protectively between me and her mother. "You must be Emma." She nodded, studying my face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read adults for signs of danger or kindness. "Mr. John said you made the best chocolate chip cookies in the whole world. He always looked sad when he talked about you." The words were like a knife between my ribs. I'd stopped making cookies years ago, annoyed by the mess and the way John would eat them all before I could have one. I'd never realized he'd been saving them, maybe taking them to children who rarely had homemade treats. "He was right about the cookies," I managed to say. "I should make them more often." Emma's grip on the rabbit loosened slightly. "Are you here to take us away?" The question caught me off guard. "Take you away?" When grown-ups in suits come to the hospital, they usually want to take kids away. Mr. John said if anything happened to him, we should call you. He said you were good people and you'd help us. But Tommy said maybe you wouldn't want to because we're not really family. My throat tightened. In the bed, Claire stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw me, she tried to sit up, but the effort triggered a coughing fit that left her gasping. "Don't," I said quickly, moving to her side. "Don't try to talk yet." She pulled the oxygen mask away from her face, revealing cheekbones that were too sharp, skin that was too pale. "You came. John would have wanted me to. He loved you so much." Claire's voice was barely audible. "He said you were the only thing that made him feel like he had a real home. He never wanted to hurt you, but he couldn't just walk away when he found us at the grocery store that day. We were so hungry, and Emma was crying, and he just started helping." I looked at Emma, who was watching us with those two serious eyes, and felt something shift inside me, something that had been frozen for months, maybe years. "How long has he been helping you?" 2 years, Claire whispered. "We've been living in the basement of an old house on Maple Street. The landlord doesn't know we're there, but it's dry and warm enough. John paid for groceries every week, and sometimes he'd bring clothes or toys for the kids. He fixed the heater when it broke, and he read to them every Sunday. Every Sunday. The days John said he was going to the hardware store, or checking on job sites, or just driving around to clear his head. He'd been reading bedtime stories to children who weren't his own, being the father figure I'd never given him the chance to be. "Where are the boys now?" I asked. "With Mrs. Presley downstairs. She's been watching them while I'm here, but she can't keep them much longer. She's got her own grandchildren to worry about." I felt the weight of the moment settling around us like snow. 3 children, a sick mother, and a secret that had died with my husband. I thought about the empty house waiting for me, the casserole dishes I'd never eat, the quiet that had become my constant companion. "Emma," I said, turning to the little girl, "would you like to come home with me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and fear. Emma looked at her mother, then back at me, and I saw something in her eyes that broke my heart. Hope, careful and fragile, like a flower growing through concrete. But before she could answer, Claire's monitor began beeping rapidly, and nurses rushed into the room, and suddenly nothing was simple anymore. The medical chaos lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. I stood pressed against the wall, holding Emma's small hand as nurses administered medication and adjusted monitors, while Claire struggled to breathe. The little girl's fingers were ice cold, her grip desperate, and I found myself whispering meaningless reassurances that everything would be okay. Words I wasn't sure I believed. When the crisis passed and Claire's breathing stabilized, the attending physician pulled me aside. Dr. Martinez was a tired-looking woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the practiced compassion of someone who delivered difficult news regularly. "Are you family?" she asked, glancing at Emma, who was back in her chair, clutching the worn rabbit. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I'm here for them." "What's wrong with her?" Dr. Martinez studied my face, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and pneumonia. Her body's been running on empty for months, maybe longer. We're treating the infection, but recovery is going to take time. She needs rest, proper nutrition, and a stable environment." "How long will she be here?" "At least 2 weeks, possibly longer. The bigger concern is what happens when she's discharged. Does she have family? Somewhere safe to go?" I looked at Emma, who was pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "She has children. 3 of them. And housing?" The question hung between us like a judgment. I thought about the basement Claire had described, the hidden life my husband had been protecting, the carefully constructed world that had crumbled the moment his heart stopped. "I'll make sure they're taken care of," I heard myself say. Dr. Martinez nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd probably heard similar promises before, watched them dissolve when reality set in. Social services will need to be involved. 3 children need immediate placement, and given the mother's condition. "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. Emma's head snapped up, fear flickering across her features. I softened my tone. "I mean, that won't be necessary. They'll be staying with me." "Ma'am, I understand your intentions, but there are procedures. Background checks, home inspections, court orders. You can't just take someone else's children." "They're not someone else's children." The conviction in my voice surprised me. My husband has been caring for this family for 2 years. He would have wanted me to continue. Dr. Martinez looked skeptical, but before she could respond, Emma spoke up in a small voice. "Mrs. Brown, are Tommy and Jake okay?" The question refocused my attention on what mattered. 2 little boys were downstairs with a stranger, waiting for news about their mother, probably terrified that their world was about to collapse completely. "Let's go find them," I said, extending my hand to Emma. She hesitated, looking back at her mother who was sleeping again, her breathing steadier but still labored. "She'll be here when we get back," I promised. "But your brothers need to know you're okay." Emma slipped her hand into mine, and we left the room together. Mrs. Presley was exactly what I'd expected. A small, elderly woman with silver hair and gentle hands, sitting in the hospital cafeteria, with 2 boys who looked like younger versions of Emma. Tommy appeared to be about 6, with the same serious brown eyes and careful way of watching adults. Jake couldn't have been more than 4, and he was coloring in a book with broken crayons, his tongue poking out in concentration. "You must be Mrs. Brown," Mrs. Presley said, rising to meet us. "John spoke of you often. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you." I studied the boys, noting their clean but worn clothes, the way Tommy kept one protective hand on his little brother's shoulder. "How are they doing?" "Scared," she said simply. "They don't understand why their mother is sick, or why Mr. John isn't coming to help. I've been caring for them since yesterday, but I can't keep them much longer. My daughter expects me to watch her children tomorrow." Jake looked up from his coloring book, his face lighting up when he saw Emma. "Emmy, is Mama better?" Emma sat down beside him, her composure cracking slightly. "She's still sick, but the doctors are helping her." "When is Mr. John coming?" Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mama said he'd take care of us if something happened." The question cut through me like glass. These children were waiting for a dead man to save them, and I was the only one who could tell them he wasn't coming. "Tommy," I said carefully, kneeling down to his level. "Mr. John was hurt in an accident. He can't come help anymore." The boy's face went very still. "Did he die?" "Yes." Jake's crayon stopped moving. Emma's hand found Tommy's, and they sat there in the fluorescent hospital light, 3 children who'd already lost too much, processing the fact that their protector was gone. "But I'm here," I continued, "and I want to help. the way Mr. John would have wanted. Tommy studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Are you going to send us away? No. The word came out strong and clear. You're going to come home with me. Mrs. Presley looked surprised. Mrs. Brown? That's very kind, but surely there are procedures. The procedures can wait. I stood up, decision solidifying in my chest like concrete. These children need somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Everything else can be figured out later. I spent the next hour making phone calls, first to my lawyer, Harold Baxter, who'd handled John's will and knew me well enough to trust my judgment. Then to Dr. Martinez, explaining that I was taking temporary custody and would work with social services to make it legal. Finally, to the grocery store, ordering enough food for 4 people instead of 1. By evening, I was driving 3 children to the house that had been empty and quiet for 3 days. Emma sat in the front passenger seat, still clutching her rabbit, while the boys whispered to each other in the back. Tommy asked careful questions about the house, about rules, about how long they could stay. Jake mostly just stared out the window, sucking his thumb. When we pulled into the driveway, Emma gasped. It's so big. The house wasn't particularly large. A modest 3-bedroom ranch that John and I had bought when we were young and optimistic about filling it with children. But to kids who'd been living in a basement, it probably seemed like a mansion. There's a yard, Tommy observed, his voice filled with wonder. With a swing set, I added, remembering the old wooden structure John had built years ago for the grandchildren we'd never had. It might need some fixing, but it still works. Inside, the house felt different with their presence. Jake immediately gravitated toward the couch, running his hands over the soft fabric. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the full refrigerator and the cookie jar on the counter. Tommy hung back, watchful and wary. Are you hungry? I asked, though I already knew the answer. All 3 children were too thin, their clothes hanging loose on small frames. We had crackers at the hospital, Emma said politely. That's not enough. I opened the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients for grilled cheese sandwiches, something simple and comforting. Why don't you show your brothers around while I cook? They explored the house with the careful reverence of children who'd learned not to touch things that weren't theirs. I could hear their whispered conversations as they discovered the extra bedrooms, the bathroom with the deep tub, the basement that was dry and warm and filled with John's woodworking tools instead of hidden lives. When I called them for dinner, they approached the table like it might disappear. Jake climbed into his chair and immediately began eating, but Emma and Tommy waited, watching me for cues about what was allowed. It's okay, I said gently. Eat as much as you want. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of eating. Hungry children finally given permission to be hungry. I watched them and felt something awakening in my chest, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Brown? Emma said eventually. What are we supposed to call you? The question caught me off guard. Mrs. Brown felt too formal, but I wasn't sure what the alternative was. What would you like to call me? Mr. John always called you Whitney, Tommy said. He said it was a pretty name. Then call me Whitney. Are we going to see Mama tomorrow? Jake asked, his voice small and worried. Yes. We'll go every day until she's better. And then we'll go home? Emma asked. I looked at their faces, hopeful, scared, trusting despite everything they'd been through. Home. The word carried so much weight, so many expectations and fears. We'll figure it out, I said. But you're safe here, for as long as you need. Later, after I'd found extra blankets and pillows, after I'd helped Jake with a bath and braided Emma's hair, after I'd read them a story from one of John's old books, I sat in the living room surrounded by the evidence of their presence. Coloring books on the coffee table, small shoes by the door, the sound of children's breathing from the bedrooms. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. Claire's condition has stabilized. She's asking about the children. I typed back, they're safe. They're home. As I hit send, I realized it was true. Somewhere in the space of a single day, these 3 children had transformed my empty house into a home. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about legal custody and social services, and the complicated reality of caring for children who weren't legally mine. I thought about John, about the secret life he'd lived in service to this family, and wondered if he'd known that his death would force me to choose between the safe, quiet existence I'd built and the messy, complicated love that these children needed. The choice, I realized, had already been made the moment I'd heard Emma's voice on that old phone, asking for help that would never come. Now the real work would begin. The social worker arrived at 7:30 the next morning, just as I was helping Jake tie his shoes. Sandra Walsh was a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and a clipboard that she held like a weapon. She stood in my doorway, taking in the scene. 3 children eating pancakes at my kitchen table, backpacks by the door, the obvious signs of an overnight stay. "Mrs. Brown, I'm going to need to speak with you privately." Emma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Tommy's shoulders tensed. Jake continued eating, but his eyes darted between us, sensing the adult tension that always preceded bad news. "The children need to get ready for school," I said evenly. "Can this wait?" "Ma'am, these children were removed from their home without proper procedures. I need to assess the situation immediately." "They weren't removed. They were rescued." I kept my voice calm, but something steel-hard was forming in my chest. "Their mother is in the hospital, and they needed somewhere safe to stay." Sandra Walsh consulted her clipboard. "According to our records, Claire Davidson has been flagged for neglect. The children should be in emergency foster care while we investigate." Over my dead body. The words came out quiet and absolute. Emma looked up at me with something like awe, as if she'd never heard an adult fight for her before. "Mrs. Brown, I understand you mean well, but no." I stood up, moving to stand behind the children's chairs. "You don't understand. My husband spent 2 years caring for this family. He made sure they had food, shelter, medical care when they needed it. These children are not neglected. They're survivors. That may be true, but without proper documentation, then we'll get proper documentation." I pulled out my phone and dialed Harold Baxter's number. "Harold? It's Whitney. I need you here now." "Yes, it's an emergency." Sandra Walsh's expression hardened. "Mrs. Brown, you can't just—" "Emma, Tommy, Jake," I interrupted, not taking my eyes off the social worker. "Go get your backpacks. We're going to visit your mother before school." They moved quickly, sensing the battle lines being drawn. Emma paused at the doorway, looking back at me with those 2 serious eyes. "Whitney, are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. You're never going to be in trouble just for needing help." After they left the room, Sandra Walsh and I faced each other across the kitchen table. She was younger than me, probably well-meaning, but she carried the institutional weight of a system that saw children as cases to be processed rather than people to be protected. "Mrs. Brown, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there are procedures. Background checks, home inspections, court approvals. You can't just take someone else's children. They're not someone else's children." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady, despite the fury building in my chest. "They're the children my husband considered family. The children he read to every Sunday. The children he worried about when it rained. The children he loved enough to keep secret from me because he was afraid I wouldn't understand. But legally, their mother is alive and conscious and can make decisions about their care. Have you spoken to her?" Sandra Walsh hesitated. "Not yet. I was planning to visit the hospital after you traumatized 3 children who've already lost the only father figure they've ever known." I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with us to see Claire Davidson. You're going to hear from her own mouth that she trusts me with her children. And then you're going to do whatever paperwork is necessary to make this legal and leave us alone. Mrs. Brown, or," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, "you're going to explain to 3 traumatized children why the system that's supposed to protect them is ripping them away from the only stability they've found since their world collapsed." Harold Baxter arrived 20 minutes later, his silver hair still damp from the shower and his expensive suit wrinkled from rushing. He'd been John's lawyer first, then ours, and had guided us through 30 years of legal necessities with patience and wisdom. "Whitney," he said, squeezing my shoulder, "what's the situation?" I explained quickly while Sandra Walsh took notes and the children waited in the living room. Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "Sandra," he said finally, "what would it take to get temporary custody approved? Background check, home inspection, character references, and approval from the biological mother," she recited. "But given the circumstances are that a dying man's last wish was for his wife to care for the children he'd been protecting," Harold interrupted. "Whitney Brown is a 62-year-old woman with no criminal record, a stable home, and the financial means to provide for 3 children. What exactly are you concerned about?" Sandra Walsh shifted uncomfortably. The sudden nature of the arrangement, the lack of preparation. Taking care of 3 children is a significant responsibility. "So is letting them slip through the cracks of a system that's already failed them once," I said. The drive to the hospital was tense. The children sensed the adult conflict and stayed quiet. Even Jake, who usually chattered constantly. Sandra Walsh followed us in her own car, her presence like a storm cloud threatening to break. Claire looked better than she had the day before. The oxygen mask was gone, and there was color in her cheeks. When she saw the children, she smiled for the first time since I'd met her. A radiant, transformative expression that made her look years younger. "My babies," she whispered as they clustered around her bed. "How did you sleep?" "Whitney made us pancakes," Jake announced. "And she has a swing set." "And she read us a story," Emma added. "The one about the Velveteen Rabbit." "Mr. John's favorite," Claire said softly, her eyes meeting mine over the children's heads. Sandra Walsh cleared her throat. "Ms. Davidson, I'm Sandra Walsh from Child Protective Services. I need to discuss the living arrangements for your children." Claire's expression immediately became guarded. "What about them?" "They're currently staying with Mrs. Brown without proper authorization. We need to discuss alternative placement." "No." Claire's voice was weak but absolute. "They stay with Whitney." "Ms. Davidson, I understand your preference, but we need to ensure the children's safety." "Their safety?" Claire tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Where was their safety when we were living in a basement? Where was their safety when I was fainting from hunger so they could eat? Whitney Brown is the only person besides John who's ever offered to help us without expecting something in return." "But Mrs. Brown has no experience with children." "She has experience with love," Claire interrupted. "She has experience with loss. She understands what it means to protect something precious." She looked at me again. "John told me about you. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever met, and that if anything happened to him, you'd know what to do." The words hit me like a physical blow. John had faith in me that I'd never had in myself. He'd trusted me with his most precious secret, betting that when the time came, I'd choose love over fear. "I can provide character references," I said to Sandra Walsh. "From my neighbors, my pastor, my husband's business partners. I can submit to any background check you require. I can modify my home to accommodate 3 children, but I won't let you take them away from the only stability they've known since their world fell apart." Sandra Walsh looked at her clipboard, then at the children clustered around their mother's bed, then back at me. I could see the internal struggle, the rules and regulations warring with the obvious love in the room. "There would be conditions," she said finally. "Regular home visits, counseling for the children, medical and educational records. And if Ms. Davidson's condition improves enough for her to resume custody, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," I said. "But until then, they're safe with me." "Whitney," Claire said, her voice barely audible, "I need you to know something. John was going to tell you about us. He'd been talking about it for weeks, planning how to explain everything. He was going to bring us to meet you the day he died." The revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. John had been ready to share his secret, to trust me with the truth he'd been carrying for 2 years. He'd died before he could find out if I was worthy of that trust. "He said you'd been sad," Claire continued. "He said you'd been lonely in your big house, and he thought maybe we could help each other. He said you'd always wanted children. I had wanted children desperately, in the early years of our marriage, but infertility had stolen that dream, and eventually John and I had stopped talking about it, built our life around the absence of the family we'd never have." "He was right," I whispered. "I was sad. I was lonely. I just didn't know how to tell him." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Whitney, are we going to be okay?" I looked down at her serious face, at Tommy's worried eyes, at Jake's innocent trust, and felt something settle into place in my chest. Something that had been broken for years was suddenly whole again. "Yes," I said. "We're going to be okay." Sandra Walsh made her notes, scheduled her visits, and left with a promise to expedite the paperwork. Harold Baxter squeezed my shoulder and whispered that he'd handle the legal details. Claire fell asleep holding Jake's hand, exhausted but peaceful. And I sat in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and the beeping of monitors, and realized that John's death hadn't ended his greatest gift to me. It had just begun it. The real work of becoming a family was just starting. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready to fight for it. 3 weeks into our new life together, I discovered that Emma hadn't been sleeping. It was 2 a.m. when I heard the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. I'd been lying awake myself, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house filled with children, the whispered conversations between Tommy and Jake, the rustle of blankets, the way Emma's breathing changed when she had nightmares. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with John's old tool manual open in front of her, squinting at the diagrams in the dim light from the stove. "Emma! What are you doing, sweetheart?" She jumped, quickly trying to close the book. "I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to be up, but I couldn't sleep and I wanted to learn about fixing things." I sat down beside her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her small hands trembled slightly. "Why do you want to learn about fixing things?" "Because Mr. John always fixed everything for us," she said in a rush. "The heater when it broke, the leak in the ceiling, the step that was loose. And now he's gone. And what if something breaks here? What if you decide we're too much trouble if we can't help fix things?" The question hit me like a physical blow. This child, this 8-year-old girl, had been carrying the weight of responsibility for her entire family, convinced that her worth was measured by her usefulness. "Emma, look at me." I waited until her serious brown eyes met mine. "You don't have to fix anything. That's not your job. Your job is to be 8 years old. But what if nothing?" I closed the tool manual gently. "You're not responsible for keeping this family together. I am. That's what adults do. We take care of the children, not the other way around." She studied my face in the dim light, searching for lies or false promises. "Mama used to say that too, but then she got sick and couldn't work, and I had to help take care of Tommy and Jake. I had to grow up fast." "I know you did. And you did an amazing job. But you don't have to do that anymore. Promise?" The word was so small, so hopeful, that it nearly broke my heart. "I promise." I made her a cup of warm milk with honey, something my own mother had done for me when I couldn't sleep, and we sat together in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, but inside, the house felt safe and warm. "Whitney?" Emma said eventually. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Were you sad before we came here?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. Children, I was learning, had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things that adults spent years dancing around. "Yes," I said honestly. "I was very sad. Because Mr. John died? That's part of it. But I think I was sad before that too. I just didn't know how to say it." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Mama was sad too, even before she got sick. She used to cry when she thought we weren't looking, but she's been smiling more at the hospital since we've been staying here. Over the past 3 weeks, Claire's condition had improved dramatically. The doctors attributed it to proper nutrition, rest, and reduced stress, but I suspected it had more to do with knowing her children were safe. The transformation was remarkable. Color had returned to her cheeks, her cough had nearly disappeared, and she was sitting up for longer periods each day. "She's getting better because she knows you're safe," I told Emma. "That's what mothers do. We worry about our children more than we worry about ourselves. Are you like our mother now?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with hope and fear and the complicated reality of our situation. Legally, I was a temporary guardian. Practically, I was learning to be something I'd never been before. Emotionally, the lines had blurred weeks ago. "I'm like your family," I said carefully. "Family takes care of each other." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. I was helping Jake with his jacket when the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find an elderly man with kind eyes and work-worn hands standing next to a woman about my age, with graying hair and a hesitant smile. "Mrs. Brown? I'm Frank Davidson, Claire's father. This is my wife, Ruth." I felt Emma stiffen beside me. Tommy moved protectively in front of Jake, and suddenly the warm morning felt charged with tension. "We heard about Claire being in the hospital," Ruth said softly. "We came as soon as we could." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Emma's hand found mine, her grip tight and fearful. "Where have you been?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but the protective instinct that had developed over the past weeks was fierce and immediate. Frank's face crumpled. We had a falling out with Claire a few years back, when she married that boy, Jake's father. We thought he was no good, and we said some things, angry things. When he died and Claire reached out, we were still hurt and proud and stupid. We've regretted it every day since," Ruth added, tears starting to form. "When we heard she was sick, that the children were—" She looked at Emma, Tommy, and Jake, taking in their clean clothes, their healthy color, the way they stood close to me. "Are you taking care of them?" "Yes," I said simply. "Thank God," Frank whispered. "We've been so worried, but we didn't know how to reach out. Claire wouldn't take our calls." "Can you blame her?" The words came out before I could stop them. "She needed you, and you turned your back on her." Frank flinched, but he didn't argue. "You're right. We failed her. We failed all of them. But we're here now, and we want to help." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Whitney, who are they?" "They're your mama's parents," I said gently. "Your grandparents." The confusion on Emma's face was heartbreaking. These children had been so isolated, so cut off from extended family, that they didn't even recognize their own grandparents. "Do they want to take us away?" Tommy asked in a small voice. "No, son," Frank said quickly, kneeling down to Tommy's level. "We want to help. We want to be part of your life, if you'll let us." The conversation that followed was awkward and painful. Frank and Ruth explained their estrangement from Claire, their regret, their desire to make amends. The children listened with the wariness of people who'd learned not to trust easily. I found myself in the strange position of mediating between generations of hurt and misunderstanding. "Claire needs to decide," I said finally. "It's not my place to forgive you for her." "Of course," Ruth said. "We understand. We wanted you to know that you're not alone in this. If you need help, if the children need anything, they need their mother healthy and their lives stable," I replied. "Everything else is secondary." After Frank and Ruth left, promising to visit Claire at the hospital that afternoon, I sat with the children at the kitchen table. Emma was quiet and thoughtful. Tommy looked worried. Jake seemed oblivious to the emotional undercurrents, more interested in his coloring book than adult drama. "Are they going to try to take us away too?" Tommy asked. "I don't think so," I said honestly. "But even if they tried, it wouldn't matter. You're staying here." "How do you know?" Emma asked. "Because I won't let anyone take you away. Because this is your home now. Because family protects family." That afternoon, while the children were at school, I visited Claire alone. She was sitting up in bed, looking better than I'd seen her since we met, but her expression was troubled. "They came to see me," she said without preamble. "My parents. How did that go?" "Terrible. Wonderful. I don't know." She rubbed her temples. "They apologized. They cried. They said they wanted to help with the children. What do you want?" "I want to go back in time and have the parents I needed when Jake's father died. I want to not have spent 2 years struggling alone because I was too proud to beg them for help." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I can't go back. And I don't know if I can trust them not to hurt my children the way they hurt me." "You don't have to decide today," I told her. "Or tomorrow. Or next week. Take the time you need." "Whitney, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What happens when I get out of here? I know you've been amazing with the children, but they're my responsibility. I can't just what? I can't just let you take over my life because I was too sick to handle it myself." I understood the struggle behind her words. Claire was a mother fighting to reclaim her role, worried that accepting help meant admitting failure. Nobody's taking over anything, I said. But I've fallen in love with your children. They've become my family too. So we need to figure out how to make this work for everyone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop thinking about this as temporary. I'm suggesting you consider that maybe John brought us together for a reason. Maybe we can help each other. Claire was quiet for a long moment. You want us to live with you permanently? I want us to be a family, however that looks. Even though I come with 3 children and medical bills and no way to pay you back? Especially because of that. That evening, as I helped Jake with his bath and listened to Emma read to Tommy, I thought about the conversation with Claire. The future was uncertain, complicated by emotions and logistics and the careful rebuilding of trust. But for the first time in years, uncertainty didn't frighten me. It felt like possibility. The phone rang just as I was tucking Jake into bed. It was Dr. Martinez. Mrs. Brown, I'm calling with good news. Claire's tests came back clear. She'll be ready for discharge in a few days. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. There's something else. Claire asked me to call you. She wants to know if the offer still stands. What offer? To be a family. I looked around at the house that had been transformed by children's laughter, at the toys scattered across the living room floor, at the pictures Emma had drawn and taped to the refrigerator, at the life that had bloomed from loss and grown into something beautiful. Tell her yes, I said. Tell her we're ready whenever she is. As I hung up the phone, I realized that John's greatest gift hadn't been keeping Claire's family a secret. It had been trusting me to love them when the secret was finally revealed. Claire came home on a Thursday morning in November, when the maple trees in the front yard were dropping their last golden leaves and the air carried the promise of winter. I'd spent the previous evening with the children, preparing her room, the guest bedroom that I'd hastily converted with fresh linens, a reading lamp, and a small vase of chrysanthemums from the garden John had tended, but I'd never paid attention to until now. Emma had barely slept, alternating between excitement and anxiety about her mother's return. Tommy had cleaned his room twice, as if his mother's approval depended on hospital corners and perfectly aligned toys. Jake had simply asked if Mama would still be sick when she came home, and when I assured him she wouldn't, he'd smiled and gone back to building elaborate castles with his blocks. When the taxi pulled into the driveway, all 3 children pressed against the living room window, watching as their mother emerged slowly, carefully, like someone learning to trust her own strength again. She was thinner than when I'd first met her, but there was color in her cheeks and purpose in her movements. She looked up at the house, at our house, and I saw something cross her face that I recognized. The complicated mixture of gratitude, uncertainty, and hope that had been my constant companion for the past month. The children rushed outside before I could stop them, surrounding Claire with careful hugs and excited chatter. She held them close, and I watched from the doorway as she breathed them in, memorizing the feel of them safe and whole in her arms. Mama, Whitney taught me how to make pancakes, Jake announced, and Emma learned to braid hair. And Tommy can tie his shoes by himself now, Emma added, her voice proud and protective. Claire's eyes met mine over their heads, and in that moment, I saw her wrestling with the same emotions I'd been navigating. The fear that accepting help meant losing herself, the guilt of being grateful for circumstances born from trauma, the exhaustion of being strong for so long. Welcome home, I said simply. Thank you, she whispered, and I heard years of weight in those 2 words. The first few days were an intricate dance of adjustment. Claire moved through the house with the careful politeness of a guest, asking permission for things that should have been automatic, using the washing machine, making tea, staying up past 9 o'clock. The children, meanwhile, seemed torn between their fierce love for their mother and their growing attachment to me, as if loving one meant betraying the other. I found Claire crying quietly in the kitchen one evening while the children did homework at the dining room table. She was staring at the grocery list I'd written: milk, bread, apples, chicken for dinner, and tears were streaming down her face. Claire? What's wrong? This, she said, gesturing at the list. This ordinary, simple thing. For 2 years I've lived with the constant fear that we wouldn't have enough food, that I'd have to choose between rent and groceries, that I'd have to watch my children go hungry because I couldn't provide for them. And now there's just a grocery list. Like it's normal. Like food is something we can count on. I sat down beside her, understanding flooding through me. It must be overwhelming. I don't know how to just be. I don't know how to live without fear. I've been in survival mode for so long, I don't remember what comes after survival. You learn, I said. We learn together. Whitney, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. Do you regret this? Taking us in? Changing your whole life for a family that isn't really yours? The question hung between us like a bridge that could either connect us or burn. I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago. Lonely, suspicious, living in a house full of ghosts and disappointments. I thought about the woman I was becoming. Someone who knew the sound of children's laughter. Someone who had fought social workers and defied institutions. Someone who had found purpose in protection and joy in everyday chaos. Claire, look around this house. Really look at it. She glanced toward the living room where Emma was helping Tommy with his math homework, while Jake built increasingly elaborate structures with blocks and books and whatever else he could find. A month ago, this was a tomb, I continued. Beautiful, clean, perfectly organized, and completely dead. John and I rattled around in here like ghosts, speaking in polite sentences and sleeping in separate beds because we'd forgotten how to bridge the space between us. Your children didn't change my life. They saved it. But the sacrifice? What sacrifice? I sleep better now because I know someone needs me to be here in the morning. I cook real meals because there are people to feed. I laugh every day because Jake tells terrible jokes and Emma draws pictures of our family that she tapes to the refrigerator. What exactly am I sacrificing? Claire was quiet for a long moment, processing. It's hard to accept that we could be a gift instead of a burden. Then let me help you learn that too. The breakthrough came a week later, during an argument between Emma and Tommy about whose turn it was to feed Misty, the stray cat who'd adopted us around the same time Claire came home. The argument escalated until Emma shouted that she'd been taking care of everyone forever and she was tired of being responsible for everything. Claire started to intervene, to smooth things over the way she'd always done, but I touched her arm gently. Let me, I said. I sat down with Emma while Tommy sulked on the couch and Jake continued playing, oblivious to the drama. Emma, you're absolutely right. You have been taking care of everyone, and you've done an amazing job. But you know what? What? You're fired. Emma blinked, confused. What? You're fired from being responsible for everyone else. Your new job is to be 8 years old. Tommy's new job is to be 6 years old. Jake's job is to be 4 years old. And the adult jobs, taking care of everyone, making sure there's enough food, worrying about money, making sure everyone is safe, those are my job and your mama's job. But what if? No what ifs. Adults handle the what ifs. Children handle being children. I watched understanding dawn on Emma's face, followed by something that looked like relief so profound it was almost physical. So if something breaks, I don't have to fix it? Nope. Adult job. And if Tommy has a nightmare, I don't have to. Adult job. And if there's not enough money for groceries, definitely an adult job. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked in a small voice, what if I forget how to just be a kid? Then we'll teach you. All of us, together. That night, after the children were in bed, Claire and I sat on the couch with cups of tea and talked about the future. Not the immediate future. The logistics of Christmas gifts and school conferences and doctor appointments, but the real future. The shape of the life we were building together. I want to contribute, Claire said. I want to work, to help with expenses, to not feel like a charity case. You're not a charity case. You're family. I know you keep saying that, but I need to feel useful. I need to have something that's mine. I understood. Pride was as essential as love. Sometimes more complicated, but just as necessary. What did you do before? Before everything fell apart? I was a bookkeeper. Small businesses, mostly. I was good at it. There's a home office upstairs that John never used. It has everything you'd need. Computer, printer, good lighting. You could work from home, set your own hours, be here when the children need you. You'd do that? Let me start a business in your house? Our house, I corrected. And yes, We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire I'd built in the fireplace. Another skill I'd learned since the children arrived, born from necessity and the desire to make the house feel warm and welcoming. "Whitney," Claire said eventually, "there's something I need to tell you. About John." My stomach tightened. What about him? The day he died, he was supposed to meet us at the grocery store. He was going to help me buy food for the week, and then he was going to bring us here. To meet you. I know, you told me. But what I didn't tell you was what he said that last time we talked. He said he was tired of keeping secrets from the person he loved most. He said it wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to us. He said you deserved to know about the family he'd chosen, and we deserved to know about the woman he'd been married to for 37 years. Tears started flowing before I could stop them. He really was going to tell me? He was terrified you'd be angry, or that you'd think he was being irresponsible with money. But he said you were the strongest, kindest person he'd ever known. And if anyone could understand why he had to help us, it would be you. I would have been angry, I admitted. At first. Not about helping you, but about the secrecy. About being shut out of something so important to him. He knew that. But he also knew you'd come around. He said you had the biggest heart of anyone he'd ever met. You just kept it locked up sometimes because you'd been hurt before. I thought about the woman I'd been when John was alive. Closed off, suspicious, nursing old wounds and forgotten disappointments. I thought about the woman I was now. Open, fierce, protective, alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He was right, I said. About all of it. Whitney. Yes? I love you. Not because you saved us, not because you're taking care of us, but because you've become family. Real family. I love you too, I said, and meant it completely. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, but inside, our house was warm and safe and full of the kind of love that grows from choice rather than obligation. Upstairs, 3 children slept peacefully, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. In the kitchen, Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator like colorful promises of the future we were building together. And in the living room, 2 women who'd found each other through loss and grief and the legacy of a good man's secret kindness sat by the fire and planned the life they'd build together. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and chosen and absolutely worth fighting for. John's secret had died with him, but his gift lived on in the laughter that filled his house, in the family that bloomed from his hidden compassion, and in the love that had transformed a tomb into a home. Some secrets, I realized, are meant to be discovered. Some losses lead to the most unexpected forms of salvation, and sometimes the family you never expected is exactly the family you've been waiting for your entire life.